Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle and thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com as well as the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel. We continue on with the class of 1999. This was a pretty remarkable year for animated films. We talked about The Iron Giant earlier. I posted a quick take video on South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. We also had Disney's Tarzan and Toy Story 2. Today we're going to discuss what was my first film from the master Japanese filmmaker Hayao Miyazaki. It is Princess Mononoke, and joining me on the podcast to discuss it is friend and fellow commentator back when we did the Yahoo with a microphone commentaries. He's also been on the podcast when we talked about The Last Jedi. I'm pleased to be joined by David Miles. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Hey Brian, how you doing?
So this was definitely my first Miyazaki, and part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you about was because of the fact that you are one of the biggest anime fans that I know, if not the biggest anime fan that I know of. When did you first see the movie?
Oh man, I don't know the exact. Like year, but I started getting heavily into anime like after I graduated from college, so 2000.
Okay.
And so it was probably somewhere within that range, 2001, 2002.
All right.
And I honestly, I think it was my first anime movie.
Okay.
Because it was like, for a lot of people, it was this movie or Akira, right?
Yeah.
right. They got them into it.
Yeah.
For me, I think it was Princess Mononoke. I don't think I saw Akira until much later. And so, and so I think I remember just watching it on my computer,
Okay.
I was one of those that downloaded things back when that was popular,
Right.
And I'm pretty sure that's where I got it. So I certainly didn't see the most high quality version, but I'm almost certain it was the subbed version.
Okay.
Yeah. But it was a while ago, but it definitely stuck with me. I mean, it's still one of my favorite animated movies.
Yeah, it's absolutely one of my favorites, and I know when I rewatched it for the podcast, I just continue to be blown away by this movie. Like I said, this was my first Miyazaki. I'd heard of Miyazaki before because at the time I had a subscription to Entertainment Weekly, in the year before, on like their best of, they mentioned the first video release of Kiki's Delivery Service in America. And they had done an English dub with Kirsten Dunst and Phil Hartman. And then this came out the year after, and I did actually see this in theaters.
Oh, wow.
I think it was because, I want to say it was because of Roger Ebert's review, which was really glowing about it, and I was just transfixed the second I saw it. It was such a remarkable piece of storytelling. I didn't really go through that phase growing up as far as watching animated films. My mother was not really a Disney person, so it's like I didn't really watch the Disney classics. I didn't really start watching animated films really on a semi-regular basis until like high school, and when I would go see Toy Story or Pocahontas and stuff like that. And so this was a movie. By this point, I was deep into my love of movies. I was deep into my appreciation of just watching movies as much as I could. And so when I saw it in theaters, it was the English dub that they had done. and really, really well done English dub. Actually,
Yeah, it is.
that was one of the things that I was so impressed with. I think I've watched Kiki's and Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke all with the Japanese dub by this point. Um, but they always Disney, when they had the rights to Miyazaki on for US distribution, they always did a really good job with the getting the right actors for the roles. And
Right.
I did watch the English dub for this one. I really wasn't in the mood to watch the Japanese dub. And I remember this English dub being really, really well done.
Right.
And plus, it's just easier to keep track of the story and the characters and stuff like that. But this is such a beautiful movie, and it wasn't my first anime. I think I had watched Akira, I think, by this point.
Right.
And I had seen, and I think I had watched another one, Fist of the North Star, when was working at a local video store that had some anime, and I think I was just sort of experimenting with different genres and world cinema and stuff like that. The thing that I love so much about Princess Mononoke is that it very much follows the hero's journey, the archetypal hero's journey, but it does it in a way that the story just veers off into something very different, while still adhering to that archetype.
Right. Yeah, and that's rewatching it again for this podcast. That's definitely something that hit me right away. Where as many times as I've seen it, I probably in the very beginning didn't think about it like that. I just thought it was like a cool movie that was just different. But now when I look at it, I was like, okay, we're hero's journey, but it is coming from a different perspective. Like it kind of pulls the rug out from under you just a little bit on that, and really kind of becomes a commentary on various things, as well as the hero's journey, and it's not hero's journey. We all win and we're happy. It's a little bit darker than that. So it almost left this movie almost left more of an impression on me rewatching it now than it even did previously. Because between now and the last time, I've watched a lot of anime, a lot of Miyazaki, a lot of Satoshi Kon, all that stuff, and so it definitely left a big impression on me this time, and made me think about various other different things this time around.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I fully understood the weight of the themes that Miyazaki was completely going for the first time I saw it, but it was such an experience from a visual standpoint and musical standpoint. And it was also unlike anything I'd ever seen. I mean, I'd seen a couple of animes before, but I was still very much used to the American, the way American animators approach animation,
right?
And the style of American animation and the storytelling rhythms of American animation, and that's one of the things that's so striking when you start to get into anime, and especially when you start to get into Miyazaki, because Miyazaki's films, even though this is I forgot how brutal this movie is I almost forget that it's a PG-13 to a certain extent.
Yes.
But at the same time, there's such a gentle nature to the storytelling. There's always a purpose for the way he's telling a particular story.
Right.
And there's such a depth of humanity. And it's something that I really don't feel like we get enough of in traditional animation in America. And it's funny, the other animated movie that I did a podcast for this year is The Iron Giant. And that's probably one of the best examples of an American filmmaker really going for very humane but complex sort of world building.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, and you know, it's funny that you mentioned how brutal it was, and forgetting about that because my older brother, who's got three young girls, he was asking me because I think there's a theater close to here that's showing, doing like a Miyazaki sort of
Yeah,
showing,
yeah,
and he was like, "Can I take my daughter to see Princess Mononoke? Because that's the one he'd heard of, right? Because it was
yeah.
so popular." And I was like, let me rewatch it real quick because just anime in general, right? Like you said, I mean, it's just there it's animation, but and so as Americans, you think, oh well, it's going to be kids stuff, so I can
Yeah.
just take my kid to it, but it's really not, and
Hmm.
it's different in Japan, and and so you have to kind of be thinking, you have to kind of be a little bit careful about what you maybe expose your kids to
Right.
in terms of these movies, and so I was like, I knew because I hadn't rewatched it yet, but I knew enough to be able to say, oh, let me watch that again. Now that I've seen it again, I'm like, oh no, because I mean, his daughters are like around the 7, 8 year old range, so
Yeah.
I mean, that is not going to happen. Maybe Kiki's Delivery Service would be
Hmm.
would be more their style. But yeah, and I think actually probably that's what got me into anime because I'd already watched a lot of traditional American animation,
Right.
and I was one of the people that liked the sort of the Disney, what was the Disney Power Hour, whatever it was, with Ducktales and stuff like that. But this anime was just something totally different. Something that I thought maybe something that you kind of maybe felt when you're watching something like Batman the Animated Series,
Right.
you know, and but even more so, even more complex, adults even,
Hmm.
whereas with Batman the Animated Series, even though you could tell that they wanted to go complex, and when you start looking at some of the other shows like Justice League and stuff like that, you can tell like maybe they might start aiming at kids, but by the end of the show, they kind of grow with whoever they knew their
Hmm.
viewers were at the beginning, and it's more adult, but they're always still kind of having to aim for what if a kid watches this? Whereas with anime for me, it was just like it was just all over the board. There had some kid
Hmm.
related stuff, but a lot of it was meant for adults, and so that's probably what struck me the most at the beginning. Just watching anime in general, but particularly with this film,
Yeah.
and so by watching this film, that got me into spreading out even more,
Hmm.
into other films.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing that's wonderful about Miyazaki and the way he operates is that his stories are so much they're there aren't, even though we're talking about, even though with Mononoke we've talked about the fact that it follows basic hero's
Yes.
journey archetype.
Mm-hmm.
But if you watch something, and Kiki's Delivery Service, sort of the same type of
Yeah.
thing, but in a different perspective and a
Right.
different way. But if you start to really dig in on My Neighbor Totoro and
Mm-hmm.
especially Spirited Away,
Right.
you see elements of that, but it's such an original piece of storytelling, not just in the way that he writes his characters and he treats the development of the characters, but just in the way he uses fantasy mixed with reality,
Right. Right. Yes.
and the way he sort of meshes those in a way where it's like the fantasy is, it's part of his real world, but it's just removed from it too.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's it's an added element without being the main focus.
Yeah.
And so and the focus is always character. I've noticed with his movies and always the character development. It's always front and center. And so you have movies coming out, live action stuff like that, where you can just where the character development is always sometimes in question, sometimes it's like not
Yeah.
there, sometimes like but with him, I mean that's like the main part of it, and that part is front and center, even though you've got potentially crazy visual stuff going on
Hmm.
and all sorts of interesting like animals and characters that you could easily get sidetracked digging into,
Yeah.
you know or to kind of but that doesn't happen. You don't get side even though the characters are weird, almost a little jarring and disturbing, perhaps the imagery. You're still transfixed on the main character, the main character's journey. So it's a deep blending of these fantastical elements inside this story. Done in a way that few people can do.
Yeah. And Mononoke is interesting because of the fact that it's a movie that very much leans in on the fantasy.
Yes.
Because Ashitaka, the main character in the movie, when we first see him shortly thereafter, he's poisoned with evil by a boar god.
Yes, yes.
That has been that's basically been poisoned by the hate of man. As
right.
seen by he's basically been shot by a he's basically been shot with a metal bullet
Right.
that symbolizes the hate of man. And so Ashitaka, while he takes the boar down, his arm is poisoned, and he's basically told you're going to die.
Right.
And you're going to die. So, but before you do, it's up to you to sort of find the root of what caused this.
Right.
And that's one of the with Mononoke, it's one of those things where yes, it leans into the fantasy heavily, and Spirited Away does the same thing.
Right. Yep.
But at the same time, you could now with this one it'd be a bit tougher to remove the fantasy elements, but you could do something. You don't necessarily need like the weirder fantasy elements of the force spirit later on in the movie and all of that in order to really make this movie accessible.
Right. Yeah. I agree. It's just so interesting because it's like you describe the beginning of it, and it's like, okay, well that could be sort of a typical hero's journey type movie, but it's just when you watch it, it's like there's so many elements, particularly at the beginning, just the way he introduces the character. He's introducing so many fantastical elements at the same time. You're just thrust into it such that it doesn't feel, even though you can kind of, especially if you're looking for it, you can kind of tell it's a hero's journey, but it never feels like it. It's such a deep blend of all these different elements. It really is, awesome.
And the thing that's wonderful is with this one, you never forget that Achitaka has essentially been sent away to die.
Right. Yes. Right.
And
right.
you never lose sight of that. Because of the fact that you have the writhing of his right arm.
Right.
That you see, and you see how that affects him in battle when he comes across the soldiers. Yeah. The samurais pillaging the village, and that was the part where the violence was like, wow, because one of them I think gets beheaded. I think it's like, oh wow, I forgot how brutal this is.
Right.
But
and you think it would have been easy for a lesser storyteller to have really kind of just like really drilled in on him taking down a bunch of guys and killing them that way, but that. It shocks you, and then like it just gets blended in as part of the story as to like his arm, how much pain is causing him.
Yeah.
What when he reacts to it, that sort of deal. It becomes a marker of some sort in terms of like where we are in the story, rather than just becoming this sort of gimmick. Fighting gimmick sort of
right.
thing. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, and I think that's the most important thing about Princess Mononoke is that when there is violence in the movie, it's important.
Right.
It's taken seriously.
Right.
It's not gratuitous. It's something that means something to the emotional way of the story.
Right. Right. Right.
And you see that from the very beginning with the attack on the boar god on the Ashitaka's village. And you see that in his confrontation with the samurai. And then you see it again later on.
Right. Yeah,
and you start to see it again and again as he gets deeper into the truth.
Right.
And it all has a purpose. It all has a service to the emotional truth of the story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, when I was watching it, and I saw the sort of the initial. I think the guy gets his hands chopped off first, and then the guy gets his head chopped off. But when I saw it, it was weird because I had this sort of just a sort of a mental pause where I was like, well, if I was watching The Matrix or something like that, then it would have almost my mind would have almost kind of glossed past it. It would almost just been like, okay, this is a fight. This is one guy taking down a bunch of guys to show us cool sequences.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than even have necessarily tell us further along the story. It's just to show us a cool sequence or show them doing something cool. But in this case, I was immediately thinking, what is Miyazaki trying to tell me when he's using this arm specifically, right, to fire the arrow that chops the guy's head off. What is he trying to tell me with that? And he's really trying to reinforce that it's the sort of that hate and anger that would turn a shot that may not be so damaging in the very beginning, a bow and arrow shot which might not be so damaging to a guy in armor, but in this case, because of the hate that's behind it,
right,
it's a beheading maneuver, right?
Yeah.
Which is crazy, right? And so my mind immediately thought about that. Whereas if this was a fight sequence that you typically see, it would have just glossed over it. But that's like he got me into that headspace at the very beginning of because this is closer to the beginning of the movie, right? So he got me into that headspace at the beginning of the movie, which is cool. I just for him to kind of bring you there to that place like that. That's not every storyteller can do that.
Yeah, and the thing that's wonderful about this is when you think about the fantasy world that he's built here.
Right.
We've seen plenty of movies, we've seen plenty of animated movies where animals talk.
Yes.
And it's usually just because the animals are the main characters and we're supposed to anthropomorphize them and give them human characteristics and stuff like that. And yet here we have animals talk in the board characters, in the wolves, and in all of these characters, and yet we don't blink an eye. It's remarkable to me that it's like when I look at these characters, when I hear these characters talking, I'm not thinking about the traditional what we typically see in animated or even fantasy worlds where animals talk.
Right, yeah.
It serves a purpose. These are just characters the same way that human characters are.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like the intention it was for us not to anthropomorphize these was to always kind of maintain the animal aspect of it. It was interesting, and I'm not sure if this was an element of the animation or if this was on purpose. I'm thinking it was maybe on purpose. Is that it almost sounds when you watch the movie and the animals are speaking, it almost sounds like it's difficult and unnatural for them to speak, almost as if by default that's not the way that they would choose to communicate, but because they're communicating with humans, this is what they're doing. There's also a couple of cases, or I know at least one when we watched the movie where there are two animals. This is when the wolf is meeting the elk. Towards the end of the movie, and they kind of sniff each other and do the usual animal to animal greeting.
Yeah.
Right. And they're not talking it out. Like you might see in like a Lion King or something like that. So he's without really telling you, he's kind of showing you how he wants you to view the animals. You know, it's
Mm,
they're animals first, who are with a struggle talking and communicating with humans. You know.
yeah. And yet it's interesting because of the fact that one of the things that you notice is when one of the things that we notice is that whenever the animals are poisoned
Mm-hmm.
or attacked in a way that, they would basically humanity has basically killed them, they sort of revert back to their more animalistic
Mm-hmm.
tendencies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They really stop communicating with human speech,
Right.
and they basically they revert back to being fully animals.
Right. Right. Right.
And it's kind of interesting that when that Miyazaki would make that choice, that when his animal characters are basically attacked and you know shot
Mm-hmm.
by humanity, that they would lose any humanity that he's imbued in them through the writing of these characters, and they basically just become mindless beasts again.
Right. 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 Yes. It's almost as if, uh, you know, perhaps a layer of showing the effect that humans can have on animals, the environment. It's like when humans inflict themselves on these animals, that causes a perversion of some sort.
Right.
And you have it much. It's very very prominent, of course, at the beginning with the boar that's been turned into this mindless monster.
Yeah.
But even in small ways, it's when humans inflict themselves on this natural nature balance, we see what was once perhaps graceful, great creatures, and this is even sort of the overarching theme of like the big spirit of the forest. What was once graceful, beautiful creature
Yeah.
is now, you know, something that returns to a basic, more destructive type instinct.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that leads us into the primary theme of the movie and the primary narrative thrust of the movie, which is this whole idea of the industrialization
Mm-hmm.
and human progress,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the way it affects nature
Mm-hmm.
when we go to when we go to industrialize, when we go to try to build up our world without really thinking of the natural world and the effects of the natural world.
Right. Right. Right.
And it's funny because of the fact that we're still having this debate about
Yeah.
climate change and
Mm-hmm.
the climate crisis. And I mean, it's depressing that we haven't gotten further in the discussion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's so brilliant on Miyazaki's part that it's bold that he would choose that type of idea
Yeah.
for one of his movies, and it's brilliant because of the fact that he's done it in a way that grounds it emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about Lady Eboshi, who runs the mill, the mine,
Yep.
the city where the bullet came from, you can kind of see her to a certain extent. You can kind of see her perspective on it
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because she's looking out for her people,
Right.
but at the same time, the way she goes about it is corrupted.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. And it's we also, when you think about like history, about Europeans coming to America, and you have Native American Indians who maybe have almost religiously imbued the land with certain properties, and spiritual properties and stuff like that. And then they come in and stomp on everything, right? Right,
Mhm.
right. And so that is almost that same sort of battle that's kind of now kind of morphed into sort of a climate change battle, right? But it's almost, for me, it's almost the same sort of kind of mental dichotomy there.
Yeah.
And so and so this is an interesting presentation for that concept. and it's when I was finished watching the movie, I mean, I'm a computer science guy, so I'm all about computers and progress and stuff like that, but I'm also concerned about climate change. I know some people believe in it, some people don't, but it concerns me that
Mm-hmm.
polar ice caps are melting.
Yeah.
Like that's obviously a change, right?
Yeah.
So what is that change going to mean? Can we even really know all the ramifications and effects that could possibly happen? But would I want to stop progress for that?
Mm-hmm.
Is an interesting question. And I don't, when I think about it, and kind of what this movie made me think about, it's like, it was presenting. He was like, he didn't say, um, okay, the nature people won out, right?
Yeah.
And the industrial people are gonna go away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now the forest is gonna go back to its. That's not what he said. They're going to rebuild, make the place even better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this idea that was that and so it's like their place was destroyed and they had to rebuild, and the forest was kind of back in balance, sort of, but the forest spirit of the forest was dead too. So it was like there's permanent effects left by what happened,
Mm-hmm.
and there was still this thought of like both sides are going to still need to try to figure out how to live in balance,
Yeah.
right? And there was no sort of clean answer to any of those
Mm-hmm.
questions, similar to kind of like how we have now,
Oh yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it did make me think about that. It did make me think, it's like, I mean, it's you can't trade one for the other. You have to
Mm-hmm.
try to live in balance with that. But what does balance looks like? It looks different for everybody,
Yeah.
and everyone's just going to kind of keep going down their lanes of progress, and so you're almost certainly going to end up at a clash again. You can almost
Mm-hmm.
think Princess Mononoke too.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Titans reclash.
Mm-hmm.
So something of that nature. So the ending, although it was kind of cool, and everybody was kind of okay. It felt a little bit ominous to me. It's like it's like
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna end up in that place again. It's only a matter of
Well,
time.
and you certainly hope, and you sort of might maybe get a little bit of an impression that maybe Lady Eboshi is in a more understanding place
Right, right,
of what of the destruction that they were causing.
right. Because it did come to, there was a cost to her,
Yeah.
to the actions that she did,
Yeah.
which I thought was a good piece of the storytelling. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is, it's like it really was the it really boiled down to the armies and Jigo,
Mm-hmm.
the who was voiced by Billy Bob Thornton in the English dub. He's sort of manipulating all of both of those sides
Right,
to
right.
where for his own purposes, and he
Right.
doesn't care.
Right, he doesn't care. Right,
He
yeah.
he's almost sociopathic in a way,
Right.
where it's like he sees Ashitaka take out the samurais early on in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
He sees that as he sees Ashitaka as somebody who might benefit him down the road.
Right.
And it's sort of the same way with him. His character is somebody who doesn't change. I mean, that's not a knock on the character. It's sometimes you need characters like that who are basically resolutely who they are
Right.
in order to speak about particular things that you're wanting to do with regards to the thematic heft of your movie.
Right. Yeah. And it actually makes sense in terms of the debate as well. There are sides of the debate that, if it if you could make money, in terms of doing all the right things with climate change, then you'd have this certain group of people on your side. So a certain group of people who are just opportunistic.
Yeah.
In terms of so you've got this perspective of what's her name, San,
Yeah.
and then so you have her perspective, Ashitaki's perspective, you have Iboshi's perspective, and then Jigo's perspective, and so they're all kind of representative parts of these parts of the conversation,
Right.
and so yeah, so he actually fit it's part of the conversation, and you know, the last scene with his character where it's like, well, you know, it's not like this side won or that side won. It's like I don't see an opportunity here anymore. You
Yeah.
know? So I'm out to the next
Yeah.
opportunity, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily caring who won or lost, and that is representative of a certain you know, type of people in that debate.
Right.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah. And I mean, he's also, I mean, he's also responsible for probably one of the more haunting images in the movie, which is when he's leading he's leading some of the soldiers to take the head of the spirit of the forest.
Mm-hmm.
They use dead boar skin to
Oh,
cover
yeah.
their tracks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that image is just so haunting.
Yes,
It's
yes.
so disturbing that they
Yes.
would do that. Like it makes my skin crawl anytime I see it. It's like, oh
Yeah,
God.
yeah. Actually, yeah, because I, you know, I'd remembered because it'd been a while since I'd seen the movie, so when I rewatched it, I'd remember certain things, didn't remember other things. But that I did remember as like being one of the scarier
Yeah.
things, you know, from it. And yeah, it is, you know, because it's interesting too, because I mean, it even works in the story well, where you know the boar, the big boar god, whatever
Yeah.
his name is, Otaku or Okoto or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
He you know, he's like, oh, these, you know, he's like, you know, my dead warriors have come
Yeah.
back. You know, and they actually do look dead. They actually do look like kind of zombies. You know.
Well, yeah, because
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
the
yeah.
eyes are gone.
Right.
It's like
So
they've been skinned, is what they've been done.
Right,
What's
right.
happened?
Right. So then when they say, oh well, you know, it's this humans wearing the
Yeah.
skin, it's just like, so it's already, I'm already like weirded out because it's like zombie boars, you know.
Yeah.
You know, but there's like humans wearing the skin. I was like, oh wow, you know, this really looks weird, and just the way he has to move, you know, stuff like that. Yeah, it was that's definitely one of. You know, there's disturbing images throughout.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the thing, but it's almost like, you know, he can make that stuff more disturbing than a guy getting his head chopped off. A guy getting his head chopped off is actually much easier to watch.
Oh yeah,
than
I mean, even Ashitaka's writhing arm. I mean, that's you know, I mean that. Yes, it's curdling to watch.
Right,
it's upsetting to watch, and you feel you. That's the amazing thing about Miyazaki's animation. And I mean, Miyazaki is somebody who he hand drew everything.
Yeah.
I mean, now I think this was the first time he had used some CGI in making the movie. But at the same time, it's just there's such a singular focus to his vision.
Right.
And where it's like you have these moments like the writhing, you know, in the arm, you have the beheading, and that's the most upsetting part is the fact that Otoku thinks that his army is coming back from the dead, and Utoku at that point he's basically blind.
Yeah.
And you see him, you see the sort of pus coming out of his eyes and covering his eyes, and it's such an upsetting sight.
Oh yeah.
And it's like that is something where it's like that's something you would see in nature. That's not the work of. It's not something you would just see in a fantasy movie. It's something you would see in nature.
Right.
And that's one of the most, and that's part of what makes it so upsetting.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. It's a very organic. You know, imagery. You know, a very organicness to the imagery, even though it's fantasy. You know, it's not. There's no clean lines there, you know. It's always you know, and but it's very much representative of nature, you know. And you know, if you look at various insects and leaves and stuff like that, you know, you see things that are visually disturbing, you know, because and they're kind of meant to be, right?
Yeah.
Because you know, because they might be warding off other animals or that sort of thing. But you know, you know, and I'm not sure if that's if the animal aspect of that, you know, the nature aspect of that is really where he was going, because he has that type of imagery in his other movies.
Oh yeah,
you know, that sort of organic imagery, but it works really well there. since it's such about nature and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You have this organic style imagery. You blend it in with this type of story. It works well there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are images in this movie I've never forgotten
Oh, yeah.
since I saw it 20 years ago.
Mhm.
I mean, you have the little I don't know what they're called, the little clicking, the white little
Oh
clicking
yeah. Oh yeah. I forget what those
like
are called. Yeah.
bugs or insects
Yeah.
or something. They're basically like insects,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I mean they're not bad insects.
Yeah,
They're just like
they're kind of humanoid though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
And then the Night Walker
Oh yeah.
is just stunning.
Oh, beautiful.
It's one of the most beautiful images I think I've ever seen in a movie. It's such a haunting moment. It's so haunting when you see the spirit of the Force evolve and seeing him evolve into that. And you see his walking and stuff, and the score by Joe Hiyashi is it's such a remarkable score. Like I basically was listening to it all the time after I watched it.
Right.
Like that score's always been a favorite of mine,
Right.
and it's such a beautiful score, and the way he builds themes, the way he uses orchestrations and percussion is just wonderful.
Right. Yeah, and so before we get into the music, because I did want to talk about that a little bit too. I didn't think about it until we started talking about it, but I'm wondering what the concept was behind the transformation of the forest spirit from the big elk thing
Right.
to the monster. Like, well, I mean, at the end it's a monster because he gets his head chopped off. But
Yeah.
but he's actually, typically it's like elk guy, which is a good guy.
Yeah.
Neutral guy, but
Right.
neutral but
Right.
good. But and then big, night beast, but still neutral but good.
Yeah.
You know? And so it just occurred to me, it's like, why does he transform?
I think it's just night and day. Because I mean, I think it's just he takes on one persona during the day where it's possible that maybe humans could see him, and then at night he's sort of himself. Which I mean, I think that's basically what it boils down to. It's I mean, after the head is chopped off, it becomes very nightmarish.
Right.
And the imagery at that moment combined with the music is just breathtaking.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like that combination of animation and music is one of the most amazing pieces of storytelling and fantasy filmmaking I've ever seen.
Right. Yeah, I feel you. And the composer, does he do all Miyazaki films?
I think so.
Yeah,
because I know he did Spirited Away.
Right. And my favorite Miyazaki score is actually Castle in the Sky.
Okay.
And which is just awesome. And I think it's the same composer. And so yeah, but I kind of felt like there are elements of that in the Princess Mononoke score. But yeah, I mean, I whenever I watch a Miyazaki film, I definitely come out of it humming the theme. But even more so, I think than in other cases where I might hear like a nice hook or something like that. Just because in my mind I'm marrying an emotional, visually interesting, stunning in some ways. Stunning, but could still be disturbing, but stunning some way. With that theme that I'm humming in my mind. It's just it always feels like, because there's a lot of great Japanese composers, and there's a lot of good anime with a lot of good scores. And a lot, but for a lot of them, I'm just kind of remembering the beat or something like that, and enjoying it. But in this case, I always get an emotionally soaring type feeling. When I'm remembering the theme or something like that.
Yeah, and it's funny because of the fact that with this revisiting of 1999, I'm sort of thinking as far as like, what would I thought about the Oscars at that point, but it's like what would I think as far as like how would I look at the Oscars now? How would I look at certain categories now? Sometimes they've kind of stayed the same, but with regards to score, I've got to say Mononoke is probably the best score of 1999, and that's that's not a small achievement when you considering the fact that I still adore the score for American Beauty.
Oh
I
yeah,
still
That was
I will defend the score for the Fan Mez even if I
Oh yeah,
don't
absolutely.
really like a lot of the rest of the movie.
Right, absolutely.
The Fight Club score is amazing.
Oh, the Fight Club score is
The
great,
use of underscore and eyes wide shut is great.
oh gosh.
But
Was Fight Club
I
1999?
yeah
Really?
yeah.
Oh god, I'm old.
Oh, there's oh god yeah there, dude, it was an insane year.
Yeah, that was an insane
But I have to say, like, I think when it comes to the emotional connection it brings to the images,
year. Yes.
I think Princess Mononoke is as good, if not better, in all of those.
Right. I feel
And that's no small feat.
Right.
Because all of those soundtracks are pretty great.
Right.
Um,
And so, how much do you feel? Because those sort of things are always a collaboration, and so how much do you feel that was like Miyazaki versus Joe, whatever his last name is? Just in terms of the blending of that. Do you think it was like Miyazaki saying kind of like, I need this. Oh no, that's not quite right. That's not quite
I would
right.
imagine. I mean, especially. Well, actually, let me look at it right quick because
Yeah.
I am curious to see how much of Miyazaki's work he's done. Let me see here. Let me try to get to this as quick as possible so we don't have too much dead air.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, it looks like Ponyo, Spirited Away. It looks. Oh wow, looks like he didn't do Howl's Moving Castle. Princess Mononoke, My Neighbor Totoro. So he didn't do Kiki's Delivery Service.
Oh.
Looks like he did not do Castle in the Sky though.
I thought
Oh wait a
he-
minute.
yeah.
Let me look up as composer. That might be different. Okay, let's see. Where are we? Okay, yeah, I think I it might be just because of soundtracks. That might
Okay.
be what that is. Because yeah, he did. Okay, so yeah, he probably did do all of Miyazaki's work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. He did.
yeah,
Yep.
he
Kiki's Delivery Service. Yep. That's
Mhm.
got Valley of the Wind, which is a good one as well.
yeah.
Um,
Although let me see, I don't think.
Away.
Okay, he didn't do he didn't do Castle of Cagliostro, which I actually just
Oh.
watched.
No, I haven't watched
But that
one yet.
wasn't. It's entertaining. It's on
Yeah.
Netflix.
Okay.
You
yes, it is
you
on
can definitely tell it's early Miyazaki. It doesn't
Right.
really have his signature in a whole lot of areas.
Right.
But yeah, so I think when you have when you have a collaboration that goes that deep and that long, I mean, think about John Williams and Steven
Yes.
Spielberg, or
Right.
John Williams and George Lucas, and
Yep.
basically like composers who Hans Zimmer and Ridley Scott is a good example.
Right.
Tim Burton and Danny Elfman.
Yep.
Anytime you have that long of a collaboration, I think it does truly become a genuine collaboration. It's not like, oh hey, so here's the film, let me see what you do. I think you are probably, as a director, you're probably talking about ideas. You're probably talking about things that you want to hear, and you're talking about the emotional underpinnings of the movie in a pretty big way.
Right.
Um, and I would be surprised if it's not the exact same way with them.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I was just looking it up. Another collaboration, anime related. Uh, Satoshi Kon and Hirasawa. I forgot what his first name is. Uh, so Satoshi Kon,
Yeah.
passed away, but Millennium Actress, Paranoia Agent, which is really good,
Mm-hmm.
and Paprika, which I absolutely love. It's probably one of my favorite. Berserk.
Yeah.
He, that was a another deep
Right.
collaboration where the music is I don't get the same feeling as I do with Miyazaki, but um, it is you could definitely tell like they meshed well,
Right.
in terms of their
Oh
styles,
yeah.
you know, and they achieved something that was greater than the sum of its parts, even if
Yeah.
it doesn't quite have the same emotional
Mhm.
pull, you know.
Well, and I think that's partially because of the type of filmmaker that Satoshi Kon was. I mean,
Right.
he was very much he was very much somebody who really was leaned more into genre
Yes, yes,
and the storytelling mechanics
right.
than I mean, and that's not a bad thing. I
Oh,
love
no.
Satoshi
Oh, yeah.
Kon.
Oh, absolutely.
He's one of my absolute favorite filmmakers, probably. Um, and but he's somebody who thought more about genre and storytelling
Right,
conventions and how to break them.
right.
Because I mean, you brought up Paprika, brought up
Yeah.
Millennium Actress. Perfect Blue,
Perfect
his
Blue, yep.
debut was a great example of that too. I mean, I think the only movie of his that was relatively traditional in terms of its storytelling is Tokyo Godfathers,
Right, which is a great movie.
which is fantastic. uh, but yeah, I mean, but Miyazaki, it's very clear. Any of the movies that you watch of Miyazaki's, there's an emotional component to that movie that is essential, and there are some of them. Admittedly, like I kind of need to revisit Howl's Moving Castle because
Yes, me too.
I remember when we saw it.
Right,
I wasn't quite as enamored with it.
right.
I'm definitely curious to see how I would feel about it now,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I was kind of that way, but it was still very early on in Castle in the Sky. But I think that one I'll definitely appreciate a lot more now.
Right,
But I mean, the thing that's great about Miyazaki and the way he uses, I mean, he's somebody who thinks about genre as well, but he works primarily in fantasy.
yeah.
And he works primarily, and he's somebody who he thinks about fantasy with regards to the emotional story that he's trying to tell.
Right,
And it isn't necessarily a typical good versus evil. I mean, even Princess Mononoke, we've talked about the different perspectives in that story. It's still not necessarily good versus evil, heroes versus villains.
right.
Because because you can kind of see how you can almost see how any of the sides are you can see why the other sides don't necessarily trust each other.
Right, yeah.
And that's one of the things that's so striking about the way he builds stories and the way he builds worlds.
Right. Yeah. And when you just mentioned that, I something I had forgotten at the end of the film, where it's like there's part of it is like boy meets girl,
Yeah.
And but it's lopsided. I mean, he clearly likes her more than she likes him, and she doesn't. It's not like they go off and be together,
Right.
She's which is part of kind of sort of the underscoring of just how much each side doesn't trust each other, and how much space there is between the mindsets of each side, and how almost impossible it might be to bring everybody together to the table to come to some sort of agreement. She says that she just can't forgive humans and hates humans and stuff like that. And she's willing to have him visit her and all that sort of thing, but it's not a love story where he ends up with a girl and they kind of walk off hand in
No,
hand. You know,
no.
she is representative of nature, the viewpoint of nature,
Yeah.
knowing that human beings are just going to be destructive towards it no matter what, even at their best,
Yeah.
and they just can't. There can only be so much trust there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just a mark of good storytelling when they don't let that they don't let that break. That like
Yeah.
that is it. That is the motivation for the character.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to get muddled, and we're going to push that out all the way to the end. See it all the way to the end for that character, and break the typical trope that you see with boy
Yeah.
meets girl. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and a lesser filmmaker would play it out with
Right.
Ashitaka and San
Mhm.
ending up together at the end. And, San really represent you're right, she does represent nature.
Yeah.
And the thing and you're right, she doesn't trust mankind
Mhm.
because of her deep her living with the wolves
Right,
and
right.
her being so close to nature, she's seen the ugliness of man
Right, right.
when it comes to nature.
Right.
And it's a credit to and you're basically and Miyazaki's basically getting you're right, it's not necessarily traditional romance,
Mhm.
nor should it really be
Right,
because of the
exactly.
fact that yes, it's obvious that he has more strong feelings for her, but it's also obvious that she doesn't trust him because she just sees another human.
Right, right.
Even if she doesn't necessarily, and it takes the point you're getting to them being they're going to at the end of this movie it's not that they end up together romantically, it's that they are a possible bridge towards man and nature coexisting stronger
Right,
than
yeah,
they
yeah.
were before.
Yeah. And the male lead, I think, is just the representative, of that bridge because he cares about her. But
Right.
he also cares about the Iron Town,
Yeah.
and he's the one saying, we've got to try to figure out a way to live together, sort of
Mhm.
deal. What's interesting also, just thinking about it, is uh, so you have the nature viewpoint, but we're being shown it through the eyes of a human.
Yeah.
And it's a human that was raised by wolves, whatever. So she's on that side for sure. No doubt
Mhm.
about that. But we are still being shown that side through the eyes of a human.
Mhm.
So I'm curious as to why that choice was made. Was it just made to make it a little bit more accessible? Because if you were just shown that through the eyes of, say, what was the wolf's name? Moro, I think was the name of it, maybe.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
if you were just shown it through the wolf's eyes or maybe the boar's eyes or something like that, would it have not had the same effect? Does showing it through the eyes of a human humanize it enough to make it accessible enough such that you could see yourself coming from their standpoint?
I think it probably was an accessibility aspect of
Mhm.
it. And I also think it is having that bond and having that potential for them to love one another as as
Mhm.
characters, even if it doesn't become a full blown love story,
Mhm. Mhm.
I think is kind of important because he kind of did the same thing in Spirited Away.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that was another example where it's like you have it's not going to be a romantic connection, but
Right.
it's going to be an emotional connection with these two characters. And I think that if you don't necessarily get that if you just have the wolves, if you just have the boars,
Right. Right.
having a human who's lived with nature and has I think it makes them sort of a reliable witness
Right. Right. Right.
in terms of storytelling.
Right. Right. I feel that.
And
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
and it's like because if it had just been like an animal, because I mean he already had him and his elk, which was clearly the
yeah,
best pal,
yeah,
so it would have and he would have died for that thing, right? So it would have been hard to escape the sort of man and his dog, man and his horse,
Right.
aspect of it if you didn't have this
Yeah.
a human character representing nature.
Yeah.
That perhaps make it more accessible, but also make it such that you could have the main character, be in love with nature in that, and more such in a way than a person that's just loving their dog. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're living, we're living in an age right now where computer technology and CGI and computer effects are as sophisticated as they've ever been.
Oh,
And they're capable of showing us so many more sights as they've ever been. And we've seen Disney do live action remakes of films.
yes.
Now, I know Disney does not have a stake in Miyazaki's films anymore. They're
Right.
independently owned now. But the thing is, it's like, I can't imagine ever seeing even with the abundance of human characters in his movies, and especially in this movie, I can't imagine what it would look like in live action.
Yeah, that's not to say that somebody won't try it.
Yeah.
I think it would be, I think he's taking advantage of some of the warmth that you get from the 2D animation.
Yeah.
In his characters. And even like the forest imps,
Yeah.
whatever they are,
Yeah.
how they kind of fade into the background sometimes and stuff like that. Very very difficult to do on the CG side, but an easy technique to take advantage of,
Right.
on the 2D side. And so to try to, you could certainly draw, and model all the stuff that
Yeah.
you put in there. To capture sort of the visual warmth and the color that he's doing, and to have that bring out the right emotion without looking synthetic, would be very difficult to do.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, I guess we have the tech. It would probably take a lot of time and money.
Yeah.
To really figure out how to capture that in a consistent way.
And the thing is, it's funny because of the fact that I think this is part of the reason that, Hollywood's been trying for like 20 years to do a live action version of Akira.
Yeah.
And nobody's been able to get to the finish line. And
Right.
I think it's exactly the same thing you're talking about, where it's like,
Right.
we certainly have the technology to do this,
Right.
to do this type of imagery. It would be prohibitively expensive, I think.
Yeah.
And B, and it's that warmth. And the thing is, it's like, I think if anybody were to try to do Mononoke in live action, I would worry that it would look too dark.
Yeah.
And the thing is, this has dark material in it.
Oh, yeah,
It has dark subject matter in it and dark imagery. It's not a dark movie. It really isn't.
Movie, right.
And Spirited Away is the same thing, where it's like, there's kind of upsetting imagery in those movies. It's not a dark movie. It's not a movie that I feel like, oh my God, that's unnerving.
Right.
I feel unnerving in some of those scenes because of what they do to me emotionally. It's not because of the fact that I think the imagery looks dark or disturbing.
Or they're really trying to push a dark theme on you. Or someone is so emotionally distraught that you're getting in their head and you're there with them. And it's not that. So yeah, it's interesting to have a movie where people are getting stuff cut off of them.
Yeah.
And not say that it's a dark movie. But that's Miyazaki.
Yeah.
It's almost and it's so it's the same thing where like when my brother's thinking, it's almost like I should be able to show this to my girls because it's like when I see the imagery for the movie, how could this possibly be dark?
Yeah.
or how could this possibly have a disturbing scene in it?
Right.
But you have to know kind of Miyazaki to know like this.
Mm-hmm.
This is he can have you show you disturbing stuff, and not have it feel disturbing in any of the imagery,
Right.
or at least of an initial impression. Not have any of the typical imagery associated with the movie.
Yeah.
Be dark. It's just you just wouldn't think it wouldn't be for kids. Even though it's
Mm-hmm.
not. And so yeah, so it would be definitely be a worry for me too. It's like if you're going to transfer it to do live action, unless you were like really deep into Miyazaki, your first thought might be just to say, okay, well, this is just going to be a dark movie and,
Yeah.
and a sad story.
Yeah.
Where but it's not. You're right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Do you I would probably say live action or animation, regardless of which version you're talking about, what medium you're talking about. I feel like Miyazaki is probably the best fantasy filmmaker we've ever seen. I there are very few filmmakers. I think that the only one I can come up with that's probably close is Peter Jackson with regards to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Even if the Hobbit movies aren't great, which they're not,
Right.
he's still continued to build that world.
Right.
I mean, I feel like that's really like he's really the only person that's come close.
Yeah. I can. Yeah. I mean, we've. Also we've. It's kind of been unfortunate that we've not really had that many great fantasy movies.
Yeah.
In and of itself. Although hopefully that might be changing after Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is not Lord of the Rings level fantasy. It's not certainly not Miyazaki level fantasy. But it is fantasy-ish. No, I mean, I mean, there's definitely not another. Satoshi Kon's coming from a different standpoint.
Yeah.
The director that does Attack on Titan and Cabaneri, he's coming from a different standpoint as well. So yeah, I mean, quite possibly. Fantasy. Yeah.
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 I mean, and the thing is, it's like I love the Dark Crystal. Right. I love the movie The Dark Crystal. I love what I've seen of Age of Resistance. I haven't watched all of it yet.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like and the world building I think is probably comparable, even if the narrative is not.
Right, definitely.
But I do feel like the world building is probably comparable. But yeah, the narrative in that is pretty simplistic and both simplistic and complicated.
Right.
Because there are moments in Dark Crystal that are just like the ending of that movie is just as insane as any ending I've ever seen.
Right. So there's some up and comers like Rebecca Sugar with Steven Universe. She. I would consider that to be fantasy.
Okay.
I mean, I guess some people probably wouldn't, but it is to me, and imagery and the thought that goes behind it is pretty amazing. I mean, there is an amazing level of storytelling that's going on there. The guys that did The Last Airbender as well. That definitely that's definitely fantasy there, and you can tell. I mean, they're going deep. I mean, they're pulling from anime influences all over the place, right?
Yeah, I forgot about that one because I have seen a couple of episodes of the original animated series,
right,
and not just the ridiculous M. Night Shyamalan movie. But
we don't talk about that.
No,
but yeah. So yeah, you're seeing some interesting storytelling there. Fantasy wise, but in terms of like established, I'm not sure about Rebecca Sugar, but I know the two guys behind The Last Airbender are definitely reaching for Miyazaki.
Yeah.
not quite getting him yet, but reaching for him. And so yeah, so I think there's some up and comers that can get there, but in terms of being established, yeah, I think Miyazaki is probably the one.
What is outside Miyazaki? I mean, you've already name checked a few. What are some of your favorite animes?
Oh, good lord!
I mean, it doesn't have to be comprehensive because I mean, Lord knows we've talked about a lot. But
if it was be comprehensive, we'd be here all day. And there's like time periods and time frames for it, but I mean, probably one of my favorites of all time is Code Geass, which is it's got robots in it, but it's a very very deep story and a very interesting premise of a guy who can control other people, but he can only do it like once.
Okay.
And so it just raises questions as to, and he uses that to like try to take over the world, right? But it raises questions as to like, if you had that power, what would you do?
Yeah.
So Code Geass is one. Attack on Titan, of course, is one. And that's just some of the best storytelling, narratively speaking, I've seen in a very long time. It is brutal, but it is it's just amazing. Wish on a Robin, which we've talked about before. Cowboy Bebop, which of course, amazing soundtrack. Some of the ones that people might not even think that I would like, but K-On!, which is about a music club, after school music club. Saki, which is about mahjong, but it has a really interesting soundtrack. Kakaguri, I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm probably butchering that. It's a gambling anime.
Okay.
It's on Netflix. Spectacular. Great visuals. One or two more. Martial Successor, Nadesco, which is sort of back in the more the 90s time frame, but it was a very good show. And Samurai Champloo.
Still need to watch that.
Yeah.
I still need to rewatch all of Cowboy Bebop.
All right.
But
yeah,
especially, and we need to talk about that.
Yeah, especially since the live action's coming out. Maybe we can talk about it when that's coming out. Yeah. And it's like it's been interesting too, because it's been interesting to see the evolution of anime over time. And there's like this. Cause like there's Neon Genesis Evangelion, but at the same time came out another show called Razefon, I think it was called. It's almost like the exact same thing. And then you had a bunch of anime,
right?
Like in the early mid 2000s, which is like I've been sucked into a game world. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And now, and some are good, like Sword Art Online and stuff like that. Some of them, I think Log Horizon, are just kind of like okay. And so it's been interesting to see kind of the genres and kind of see what kind of comes up, comes down, and then you get these random crazy ones like Attack on Titan, which just kind of just blows everyone away, or One Punch Man, which is I haven't seen the second season of it. Supposedly it kind of went down in terms of quality, but the first season was just so crazy and out of this world that it was just amazing. So those are some of my favorites. I'm across genres. I'll do sports. I'll do big robots. That sort of thing. But I think there's definitely like garbage out there. And so I definitely have a taste for stuff that is at least somewhat complex. And something that I don't necessarily feel like I'm wasting my time on. But I think Netflix has done a really good job picking out or creating animes that are really good. One that's really good that I really liked. Some people liked it, some people didn't, but I really liked it. Is one called Hero Mask.
Okay.
So it's a very interesting premise, and the intro is spectacular. Very simple, but the music and the way it's done is spectacular. So I would recommend just like watch episode 1 of that, just to see kind of how they do the intro, because it's fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap it up, did you have anything more to say about Mononoke? We covered a lot of ground. I mean, we really did cover. I think we covered most of what I wanted to talk about. But was there anything you had left?
No, no, no. I was glad when you talked about wanting to do the film because it'd been a while since I'd seen it.
Yeah.
And so now I'm probably gonna watch Kiki's Delivery Service and Valley of the Wind. I'd watched Castle in the Sky more recently than I watched Princess Mononoke.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna probably pick up a couple more Miyazaki movies just to kind of now that I'm in the headspace. But no, no. Again, one of the first, if not the first, anime films that I saw.
Hmm.
I think before that it was just like stuff like Robotech and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so it really opened me up and took me into another place animation wise. Animation is my favorite medium,
Yeah.
for storytelling. And so, I'm glad that my introduction into it was this film.
Yeah.
It set the bar high. And it has kept me looking for the stuff that's good and complex.
And I will put in a quick plug before we wrap it up, where because Studio Ghibli does have the Ghibli film festival that
Oh
it kind of does yearly, where it just cycles through Miyazaki's work. Um, I hope that doesn't go away now that the films are going to be streaming on HBO Max
Oh
next
yeah, I
year.
just read that. Yeah.
But if you get a chance to watch Miyazaki on the big screen, I think the Spirited Away screenings already happened this year, but I highly recommend it because I mean I know we definitely saw Ponyo and Howl's Moving Castle together on the big screen.
Yep.
I don't remember if we saw Spirited Away together.
I don't know if we saw. I mean, I definitely saw it on the big screen. I
Yeah.
can't remember if we saw it together.
And Princess Mononoke was a remarkable film to watch on the big screen. Take those, take those opportunities that they come along. I mean, any great film needs to be seen on the big screen, I think, and especially a movie with the scope and the imagination of Mononoke deserves to be on the big screen. It's a shame that we don't, with the exception of Turner Classic Movies and Fathom Events, they're really them, and then Ghibli Festival is really like the only opportunities, at least in our area,
Right.
that you really get a pretty comprehensive um, opportunity to see movies like this on the big screen. Uh, with the exception, unless you go down to downtown Atlanta, which I know the Plaza Theater. I've seen a lot of great older films on the big screen there. The Landmark Midtown. I've seen some films there,
Right.
and it's well worth the opportunity, especially if you never saw it on the big screen but fall in love with it on home media. You you definitely owe to yourself to check movies like this out.
Yep.
And Miyazaki, I and Mononoke, I think is one of the great ones. Well, David, thank you very much for joining me on this tonight. I'm glad we finally were able to do this. I'm glad we're finally starting to get you onto the podcast more and more. Hopefully, because I know next year we want to talk about Satoshi Kon. I definitely want to talk Cowboy Bebop with you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's great to have you on here again.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I'd like to thank David Miles for joining me in this discussion of Princess Mononoke. It's great to have him on as always. That's going to do it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema Podcast, Class of 1999 series. It's going to get wild the rest of the way through. We have Michael Mann, we have Paul Thomas Anderson, David Lynch, Anthony Minghella, Harold Ramis, Chris Columbus, James Mangold, a bunch of great talented filmmakers, and a lot of really diverse films to talk about, and I'm looking forward to getting to all of those. Join me at patreon.com/SonicCinema. You're going to get early access reviews. A lot of them have been for the Class of 1999 series, as well as some exclusive blogs. I just did one on comparing and contrasting the two versions of It, the TV miniseries, as well as Andy Muschietti's films. I'm looking to do something to commemorate the conclusion of the Skywalker saga and how I rewatched the Star Wars movies leading up to the Rise of Skywalker. So check that out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. And that's it for me. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com.